So I think I'm standing between you and lunch at some point. So the advice I was given is to be brief, be sincere, and then be seated. I'm gonna try to do that. First, I am delighted to be in Utah. I'm given a warm welcome every time I'm here, and I don't know if that's related to my name or not. But I will say that in doing a little bit of homework for this, I found a quote that people often use about coming to Utah, and they say, either you love Utah or you're wrong. And so I just want to say I love Utah, and I hate being wrong. So my job today is to try to give you some thoughts, integrated thoughts on where healthcare is going. And so I will have a lot of slides. I'll go pretty quick because it's a pretty broad landscape of healthcare, and where it's going, there's a lot of different challenges that we're facing in the moment. And so I would say, take that extra slug of coffee because we're going to go pretty quick. If this works, it's going to be even better. So prediction about where healthcare is going is very difficult. I think Niels Bohr said it best. Prediction is very difficult, especially about the future. And so you'll take what you want from this talk, but I'm going to try to give you my best thoughts at any rate. If any luck, this will go forward. If not, we're in deep trouble. There we go. So that's my only commercial about BD. Big company, you've heard the story. That should be my last commercial slide. And if this is going to be like this challenging, we're going to be in trouble. This is where I was going to say to you, like corporate.bro, if you guys have gone online and looked about keynote speeches in 2023, what you have to talk about is AI. And the thought was, if you look it up, you walk on stage, you say AI, everybody applauds, and then you sit down. So it's obviously more complicated than that. AI is either cast as the savior or the villain. It's either the thing that's going to change everything we do in healthcare and everything we do writ large, or it's an enormous threat. And what I would tell you, this won't be a challenge really, I can work a clicker, is that AI is a very powerful tool, and it should be viewed pretty much, oh, look at that, I get another one. That's amazing. So as a very powerful tool, it will change a lot of what we do. But it doesn't have its own persona. It doesn't come with its own agenda. It will enable those of you who are trying to do good as much as it will enable the evil actors. But we should all pay attention, because I get asked this a lot. Is AI going to replace doctors? And what I tell everybody is that doctors who use AI will likely replace doctors who don't. And so this isn't the case that this is a malevolent or wonderful savior. It's just a very potent tool. If you're interested in seeing what the potential cultural implications of AI are, I would refer you to this book, interestingly written by Henry Kissinger and Eric Schmidt. And I can't imagine two people who I think have fewer things in common than Henry Kissinger and Eric Schmidt. So when they got together to write this book, there must be some things about it that are pretty important. And I would tell you, having read it, it is remarkably important. One of the things that the last quote here I like is that once it's clear that AI's performance outstrips human performance in some things, it will become almost malpractice in some way not to use it. Because once you have a tool that is better than what you could do on your own, you will have more or less an imperative or an obligation to use it. And so I would encourage you, as I encourage my children, to hurry up and learn to use this, so that you don't get left behind. There's a bunch of quotes in this book and other books and what people say. The one I like the most here is the last. By far, the greatest danger of artificial intelligence is that people conclude too early that they understand it. And I think it's changing fast enough. If anybody listened to 2 days ago, OpenAI did their developers conference, and if you thought ChatGPT was good or GPT-4 was good, GPT-4 Turbo makes all of that look like a kindergartner's tool. And so it's changing really quickly, and you're going to have to stay abreast. But this whole talk won't be about AI, I promise. When we get asked to think about it as a big company, as I know many of you are. You can have linearly foreseeable use cases. Like it can summarize lots of documents. It can provide educational materials or even help you with marketing materials. There's all sorts of opportunities for it to help in decision making, even clinical decision making. And you can imagine a day when multimodal AI will show up and you can actually learn so much about an individual circumstance or an individual patient that you can make inferences that you couldn't otherwise make. And this book, The AI Revolution in Medicine by Peter Lee and Isaac Heine, I would really recommend it. It kind of knocks your hair back as you go through it in terms of the opportunities. But the problem or the opportunity is that AI doesn't really work in a linear projection. It doesn't think the way we do. It's much more powerful than that. I'm going to give you two quick examples. One is AlphaZero was a program not meant so much to play chess, but it was essentially an AI given the rules of chess, and then it played itself for a day. It wasn't exposed to any other chess game. It didn't have any history of the human experience of playing chess. And it was asked after just 24 hours to play up against Stockfish, which at the time was the most powerful chess engine ever devised. And to give you a sense, Stockfish looks 80 million moves ahead. And so that's pretty impressive. It examines 80 million, whereas the AlphaZero was only really looking at about 70,000 moves ahead. And yet, the amazing thing is that AlphaZero whipped it every time. It didn't lose at all. It won 28 times. It tied 72 times out of a trial of 100. And it only spent a day learning to play. And that's because it learned to play itself and it knew the rules. And so when you've got really smart people looking at it and said, it plays chess from another dimension. It makes choices that humans wouldn't make because it's not bound by our typical human conventions. You should think about that as you think about the use of AI going forward. It doesn't necessarily do it like we do. It doesn't depend on our history. It doesn't have our intuition. It works very differently. Another use case closer to home. So imagine taking an AI and exposing it to 25,000 chemicals, 17,000 approved by the FDA, another 8,000 approved. Another 8,000 are natural substances that are known to have some antibiotic properties. And then you take that and you let it look at the Broad Institute's 6,000 drugs that it has in various forms of development and ask it one question. Which of those 6,000 drugs is likely to be an antibiotic? And so of those 6,000, it identified one. It identified one that didn't have anything in common with antibiotics that we've used to date. And in fact, it had a mechanism of action which was not thought to be terribly useful. It got involved in iron shuttling, and there wasn't a thought that you could interrupt iron shuttling and that would be a potent antibiotic. And yet, it's a very potent antibiotic, and it's a potent antibiotic against some things we struggle with. C. diff, Acinetobacter, Pseudomonas, MTB. So it's still in development. It's being tested. The cool thing is, because it was given a lot of approved drugs to look at, it also winds up being benign in humans to date. And so I think the curious thing is, again, it's not a linear projection. You can't start with AI and say, oh, it's just going to help me do my job better. No, it's going to look at things very, very differently and come up with very different results. So I'm reasonably optimistic that this is great. It's everywhere, and so that's why I felt compelled to talk about it. It's not a savior, it's not a villain, it's a very important tool, and I would encourage you to get to know it because it's going to be an indelible part of our future going forward. That's what I'm going to say about AI. Where healthcare is going. I'm going to try to get back on track and do this in a good way. So this is a slide I borrowed from someone else, the Ink Factory. The future of healthcare is, and obviously it's an awful lot of things. right? So it should be inclusive. It has to be about the individual. It's necessarily global. It's necessarily digital. And so which of these are you going to follow? Which of these are you going to work on? And are we going to wait for healthcare to be discovered, or are we going to develop it? And I think we know the answer. What the future of healthcare really is built by the bold who are willing to innovate on the solution, or innovate on the problems that we have to date, and generate the solutions that are going to drive what healthcare looks like. I talk a lot about innovation. Innovation doesn't exist without problems, right? I mean, and I don't mean the problems of innovating. I mean the thing you're innovating on, right? So innovation is when you invent a solution to a problem that brings value. And so healthcare, fortunately, is rife with opportunities at this moment, right? So you've got problems that range from the economics of healthcare to, I think Jeff Shuren was just talking about the regulation in healthcare, and he's working hard to make sure that that's more responsive and more rapid and more appropriate. We've got problems around nurse and other clinician burnout and compassion fatigue, and we've got problems related to our ability to deliver great outcomes. I mean, we're just surprised to know that infant mortality is now increased in this country over year. And so the good news is we've got lots of problems. And I say that because, Einstein was right. In the middle of every difficulty lies opportunity. Each one of these problems is a focal point for our innovation going forward. Here's the first opportunity I would draw attention to: U.S. healthcare spending. When people put up this slide, they say, oh my God, we spend more than any other country on the planet, both per capita and in aggregate. And so it's like, man, are we really screwed? How are we going to continue to spend this much money? And what I would say is this is a remarkable opportunity, because there is more than enough money circulating around in healthcare today to solve our healthcare problems. It may not be distributed in the best way. We may not be investing it in the most important solutions, but there's more than enough money already on the table to solve the healthcare problems that we have. I like that. I'll tell you that we as a country have been disparate from the rest of the developed world in our healthcare spending since 1980, and it's only gotten more pronounced. And so we had enough money then, we've got more than enough money now to solve the problems. And so while some find this an area to be depressed about, I find this an area to be remarkably optimistic about, because there's more than enough money. This last little graphic is to say, and if you look at where we spend extra dollars in healthcare, it's all over the place. It's not like there's one place. It's not like we spend too much on drugs. It's not like pay our doctors too much. It's not like we have too many administrators. It's in fact all of these things. We spend it all across the board. How about efficacy? How are we doing in terms of delivering healthcare as a product? Well, this is longevity, and the bottom curve is expected longevity at birth in the US, and the rest are of the average of the developed world. So no, we're not doing great in terms of our overall efficacy of delivery for our population. We have some particular outliers here. That is maternal mortality. We stand out among all of the other developed world in terms of maternal mortality. That is enough of an opportunity to be an embarrassment. And then, of course, if you look at disability-adjusted life years, and so that's kind of the flip of quality-adjusted life years, which we often get asked to measure. So that is, essentially, if you add this together, what this really says is the United States, we die quicker and live sicker than the rest of the developed world. Now, I would point out that even here in Utah, we're working on this disability thing. I mean, I know that it was just a year ago that the Utah Bionic Knee made the cover of Robotics magazine here in Utah. So there are lots of ways of addressing the disability problem, but we have a substantial problem in terms of the efficacy of our healthcare system. And it's not just peanut butter, like we're all doing badly. It's that some parts of the country are doing much worse. This is my home city of Baltimore, where I was born. And if you look across this, you can see that there are some zip codes where the life expectancy is 20 years different from an adjacent zip code. And you might ask how that can be, and I can tell you firsthand experience. I grew up where that blue dot is, and there, in addition to having uncontrolled diabetes and hypertension, it was also a knife and gun club with impromptu pharmaceutical sales. And so we have a lot of work to do in fixing healthcare and our measures of healthcare, and that yet provides an additional opportunity for the work we have in front of us. If I asked you to think about healthcare efficiency for the moment, so this is something that there are a couple of organizations keep track of, Peterson being one of them, Commonwealth being another. Obviously, if we don't deliver a great outcome and we spend a lot of money, we are the least efficient player in the developed world in terms of how we're doing in delivering a product in healthcare. And this will point out, this little graphic says, we do spend more on administrative costs than our average in the rest of the developed world, and we actually underspend on long-term care. And that gets to be a bit of a problem because we as a population are aging. Of course, just another graphic to remind you that we spend more than any other country on the planet while we're doing this. And then we have provider challenges, right? I mean, so nursing burnout made the headlines all over the place. I would tell you that it's not just about shortages in nurses as the senior nurses are leaving, can't really tolerate their work anymore. We're left with nurses of less tenure in jobs, and that can speak to there being more challenges in healthcare delivery. But it's also the case that we're running out of doctors, that we're running into a real physician shortage as well. If you look for the opportunity here, it's to say, what are the tools that we can make for these clinicians to make them more efficient? What are the things we can do to automate some of their tasks? What are the things we can do to make their jobs more delightful? I will say that we seem to have solved this problem with healthcare administrators. That's the orange curve, and they are well outstripping the growth of other clinicians. We are doing a bang-up job in employing hospital administrators. And so maybe that's not the solution we need. Opportunity number 5, our aging demographic. By 2034, we will have the same number of people over 65 that we have under 18. That will be a milestone for us. We have typically had way more younger people who can work to support the systems that provide health care and other forms of social relief to seniors. And now that curve is changing. We're running into an aging demographic. And the implications for health care, I think, are dramatic. Because as we age, that's where chronic diseases accumulate. And so if you think about it, we're winding up in a healthcare system that is shy of nurses, shy of doctors, but well replete with seniors with a series of chronic diseases. That should encourage us all to think about how can we make healthcare more simple to provide, more automatic to provide, and how can we interact with folks not in acute care settings, but in more chronic care settings. And so those are the things we should think about as opportunities. You might at this point say, oh my God, he just described just a series of rolling disasters. And so help me out, is this business sustainable? I mean, is this gonna keep going? What are you gonna do? And so you can ask this question. When you look, CMS estimates that by the time we get to 2031, we will spend $7.2 trillion in healthcare in the United States. Now, to give you a sense for context for that number, in 2022, the entire federal budget was only $6.2 trillion. So in just 5 short years, we're going to be spending more as a country on healthcare writ large, all federal programs and personal expense and all that, than the entire federal government spent in 2022. So yeah, there's good news. We're growing the business. There's a lot more money going to be spent in healthcare. Really a question of can we afford to do this? And so I would tell you that this particular collision has been described previously in history. And the one that I draw attention to here is kind of an 18th and early 19th century essayist, economist, philosopher, Thomas Malthus. And he famously drew attention to the notion that in Europe, we were going to have to start making the streets narrower, reducing sanitation so that we could have more people die of the plague. Get that? He was advocating for social engineering so that we could have more people die of the plague because he thought that we wouldn't be able to grow enough crops to keep the people in Europe alive. And so his recommendation was to live down to the means of production. And that recommendation has forever relegated him to the dustbin of history because that's not the way we work. right? When posed with the challenge, we innovate to increase production. We innovate to make processes more efficient. He didn't envision Archer Daniels Midland figuring out how to get more crops per acre. He didn't imagine that we could do complex irrigation systems to make otherwise arid land fertile. And so the innovation that was required to allow there to be persistent growth wasn't clear, wasn't in the mind of this particular fellow, and I would encourage you not to let it enter your mind. That innovation is a powerful engine, and that the challenges that I just briefly described to you, each of those is an opportunity for dramatic innovation. And so don't let yourself fall into this Malthusian trap. I would tell you that U.S. healthcare is a burning platform for innovation, and I had to use the orange because that's a beady color, just so you know. I think opportunities are truly everywhere because we have remarkably malaligned incentives in healthcare, right? We still pay people like me, docs like me, to take care of people once they get sick instead of paying me to help people avoid getting sick. We treat chronic diseases when they show up with an exacerbation as opposed to keeping people in the straight and narrow. So our incentive system is malaligned. We've got remarkably delayed adoption of value-based care. So I'll give you just one quick example. Partial meniscectomies for knees. It's one of the most common orthopedic procedures we do for people with knee pain. Double-blind, randomized controlled trial shows that it is no better than placebo. We still do it. It is still the most common procedure that we do. We are just slow to adopt value-based procedures if it takes money off the plates of hospitals or practitioners. So we haven't fully embraced value-based healthcare. Hospital and provider centricity. I have a friend who runs a hospital. He says there's only one reason people come to a hospital, and that's because they have to. It isn't the case that you want to run to a hospital because it's such a warm and fuzzy place. No, it's because that's where healthcare is delivered. We figured out how to, I do a lot of shopping on Amazon. Does everybody do a lot of shopping on Amazon? Amazon has figured out how to bring products to you. It seems remarkable to me that in one of the largest industries that we have in the United States, we haven't figured out how to bring healthcare to people. But stay tuned because there's work on that. Fragmentation. All of our systems are fragmented. I was drawn to the fact that a colleague told me that at Duke, they have more billers in their healthcare system than they have beds. I found that challenging to believe until you look at the number of healthcare payment systems we have, the number of insurance companies we have, the number of different ways you need to certify that a particular procedure can be done and how you can bill for it and code for it. And so we've got a system of fragmentation that is in fact what underlies that remarkable growth in hospital administrators, because our systems are so complicated that we need lots of people to help manage them. Not efficient, but complicated. Uneven and inequitable access, I think the graph of my hometown showed you that. Complex, non-standardized workflows. I mean, if you've been in a hospital and you've watched people do things, and then you go to another hospital and you watch people do things, it's oftentimes remarkably different, trying to achieve the same tasks. And so it is imperative, if we're going to take some of the burden off of nurses and other clinicians, that we're going to have to streamline and standardize workflows in ways that technology can assist. Lack of evidence-based decision-making. I mean, there's a lot of things that we do in medicine because we've done them that way. That sort of, it's familiar to me, and that's what I'm going to do. Or the last time I learned about medicine was when I was in medical school, and now it's 30 years later, and I'm still doing it the same way. None of that makes sense, and so we have to further incentivize that. And then what we really need is a smart and learning healthcare system so that every patient who shows up with a critical problem can benefit by all of the patients like them who've presented previously. And we don't have that. We don't have that in a single hospital, and we certainly don't have it writ large over all hospitals. But wouldn't you love that? Wouldn't you love to know, okay, so in the last 24 months, there have been, 3,000 patients who've presented just like you, and the ones that did the best got this level of care. This is what we should do for you. That's not the way we practice. And so that needs to change. And then I talked about episodic rescue versus kind of continuous care for chronic disease. We can do a lot better. Now the good news, we're solving all of these problems in parallel. Malaligned incentives are giving way to at-risk, outcomes-based contracting. Even companies such as ours get involved in making contracts that say, you only really need to pay this much for this if it works. And if it doesn't work, then we didn't bring enough value. And you should ask most companies to do that. Delayed adoption of values-based care is now giving way to requirements of proof of value. You need to show up not just with evidence that you have something that makes you incrementally clinically better, but also it has to have an economic benefit, or many hospitals just won't adopt it. Hospital provider centricity is giving way to convenience and community and home-based care. So I've been really quite interested in following with great interest the hospital at home movement as we're trying to move hospital-level acute care to the home, because that's where patients really want to be. Fragmentation is gradually giving way to consolidated and standardized care. Sometimes that's by acquisition of individual providers by large mega organizations, but it's still getting better. Uneven and equitable access, we have federal and state programs that are helping to give people access and are doing outreach, so that's getting better. Non-standardized workflows being tackled sometimes with med tech, that we're doing that. We're letting technology do what it does best so that we can take some of the burden off of clinicians. And then lack of evidence-based clinical decision-making, that's being solved. If you've spent time living in an EHR, you can find that it's incorporating information from lots of sources, and it's giving you assistance, it's giving you help. I know as a doc, we don't necessarily love computers helping us to make decisions, but it's coming, and it's more prevalent now than it used to be. And then this lack of a truly smart and learning healthcare system, this is gradually being addressed. We're watching big hospital systems integrate their data about care, about outcomes, about technologies into large data lakes where they can subsequently retrospectively review and make sure that they're getting better. There are hospitals that have black boxes in operating rooms to kind of watch what happens and iteratively correct what's going on. And more hospitals are putting cameras in to look at workflow and see if there are ways to make it better. And so the transformation that we need to take place is in fact happening. And then episodic rescues is obviously being replaced. And this is a place where AI is playing a big role in terms of trying to make subtle measurements, keep people in the straight and narrow. Diabetes is a great role model for that particular operational format of care. So it's constantly measuring, how are you doing with respect to your disease activity, and then constantly treating as a way of keeping you on the straight and narrow. So I'll paraphrase Peter Drucker here. The best way to predict the future is to create it, and that's what we are collectively doing. I would say that, yes, we are investing in the irreversible forces advancing healthcare. When I think about smart and connected care, one of the things we tell ourselves, and I think we hear it from the rest of you as well, is that a smart digital system that moves data instead of people is an essential element for our smart and learning healthcare system going forward. We won't know what actually works best until we measure all of the ways people are being taken care of and compare that to outcomes and then share that broadly. Obviously, simplifying clinician workflow is terribly important. We have, over the pandemic years, taught clinicians to hate their jobs. The compassion fatigue together with, just the shock of having to deal with so many sick people who are sick from a largely preventable disease, and then as they go back into the community and they see people ignoring the guidance, it was driving many to distraction. And so we need to do a much better job of simplifying their workflows so that we can return delight back to their jobs and keep them from managing the technology that we make, let the technology manage itself, and then give them the free time to manage the patients and the families. That's why a lot of these folks went into it. Enabling decentralization of healthcare. It is not the case that hospitals are necessarily the perfect place for sick people to be. And you only need to practice medicine for a while to understand that hospitals provide a lot of opportunity for good, but also there are some important harms that get facilitated in hospitals. And then we need to use technology to create thoughtful interlocks, keeping people from making mistakes. And of course, avenues for collection of information about value. We need to do a much better job of bringing not just an incremental clinical benefit in a randomized controlled trial, but also a value that triples down to making the provider better, making the patient better, making the economics better. Unless we do those things, unless we can document and prove them, we're going to be really hard-pressed to move our innovations into healthcare. I sat with a chief nursing officer and was describing this really cool thing that we've got, and she said, if it takes an in-service, If I have to bring my nurses together to learn how to use your thing, I'm not going to adopt it. I'm not going to spend the time. We don't have the time to learn how to use your new thing, no matter how good it is. And so that's got to be a wake-up call that our stuff has to be so intuitive and bring so much value. It's not just that ease of use. We talk about ease of use. Ease of use means something very different now. It used to mean we can teach people how to use it pretty easily. Now, ease of use means when I use it, it makes my day better. I would run to use that. We don't yet do that. New care settings, terribly important. We spend a lot of time thinking about it because we're an acute care company for the most part. It's overdue time to return patients back to the center of healthcare. We've got to answer the secular drive for this notion that convenience is the new quality. I mean, I buy a lot of stuff on Amazon without ever seeing it. I'm just reading someone else's review. And the notion that that level of convenience trumps my otherwise potent desire to understand if I'm getting something really good. Nope. It's good because it comes to me tomorrow and other people said they like it. And so we have to do a better job of providing some level of quality via convenience in healthcare. Providing ways to match the intensity of the care with the location. There's an awful lot of levels of intensity of care in a hospital. There's the ER, there's the outpatient observatory place, there's the med-surg floor, then there's the critical care units. We've got this full stack. A lot of those people could safely go home if we had the right wraparound technologies and services to do that. And they would prefer to be home. And so maybe we need to do that. Decreasing the burden and cost of chronic disease, it's a great big deal. And obviously that means you're moving into new care settings if you're going to do that, because chronic disease patients are failing when they're in a hospital. You need to help them succeed by keeping them well outside the hospital. I'll say a little bit more about care settings. So hospitals came to be because we needed to centralize expertise. We needed to amortize the cost of really expensive equipment over a lot of patients that we couldn't really move from place to place. We needed to establish a place where the next level of clinicians could be trained. We needed to take advantage of the economies of scale. There were a bunch of reasons why hospitals came to be. But you know what? They have real limitations. And here is MGH, man's greatest hospital, so they say, and Johns Hopkins, places I've spent a lot of time into. If you look at them, or more so if you wander the halls, these have the warmth of an industrial complex, right? This is not exactly the way you would think of the best place to get better from a problem. To describe it as a sterile environment, I think would be a little bit too cute, but it's not necessarily warm and loving. It's a place you go because that's where healthcare is administered. But there are tons of limitations. And this one I pulled because it's not slamming any particular state in our country. But here, if you look at, in January, the number of COVID cases, what you learn is that maybe a third of the patients treated for COVID in the hospital acquired COVID in that hospital. And so hospitals are not benign. They're not all by themselves. They're just a wonderful place where only good things happen. There are all sorts of limitations of a centralized healthcare model. This from David Bates. If you don't know David, he's like the guru of hospital patient safety and lives within the Harvard system and put out an article, and it got picked up by the Wall Street Journal. 34 patients out of every 100 has an adverse event in a hospital. And that's not from 1880, that's from 2 years ago, just published recently. And so we can do an awful lot better. When I look at the big categories of adverse events, it speaks to things we're all innovating over. So medication management and delivery, infection prevention and detection, patient-centered solutions for vascular access management, which we do here in Utah, incontinence management, because if you think incontinence is a problem that people don't like to talk about, find someone who's got it. They'll certainly talk about it, because it can change their venue. You can be stuck in a hospital because you can't go home because no one's there to manage you. You can't go to a skilled nursing facility because they've got a cap on how many people they can take who are incontinent. The downstream effects of, if you're incontinent, you have to get up in the middle of the night to pee, and that's where people fall and break their hips. And if you're an elderly person who falls, you understand that can be the last seminal event in your life. And so big issues that we don't talk about as much as we should. And obviously, rapid diagnostics plays a big role in trying to help people get over some of the things that they acquire while they're in the hospital. If you look at hospital-at-home programs, they're small, but they're mighty, and they're good, right? And so if you think about the total numbers here, we're talking in 2022, there were only about 18,000 hospital-at-home admissions. The severity of illness mirrored that which you put on a med-surg floor in a hospital, and the patient experience is overwhelmingly positive, and the outcomes are overwhelmingly positive, and the economics are overwhelmingly positive. Do you think that hospitals typically live on single-digit margins? Oftentimes in this last year, negative margins. Hospital-at-home programs typically find a 30% margin in terms of being able to take care of patients, delight them, and give them a better outcome. And there is no way to get a hospital-acquired infection if you're not in the hospital. There's been a catalyst. The federal government has been excited about this and has provided a catalyst. They've created a waiver program that actually pays the same amount of money if you're admitted to your home as if you're admitted to the hospital. And so this is a temporary waiver. It got extended to the end of 2024. It's driving hospitals to participate. It also waives the notion that you need a twice-a-day visit, you need 24-hour visiting from nurses. In fact, this allows for a twice-a-day visit, and some of those can be virtual visits. About 7% of all hospitalized patients could be safely admitted to a hospital-at-home program, and that's just based on today's metrics. If we innovate the technologies available, we can probably raise that number to 30% of patients can be safely taken care of at home. So there are lots of reasons this has taken off. I'll say that there's also some that limit scalability. Reimbursement has to be locked in right now. There's a waiver that locks it in until the end of 2024, but that's got to be locked in. We've got to develop specific solutions for this market. If you look at kind of some of the complex IV infusion equipment that we make, great big pumps that have lots of knobs and buzzers and make all sorts of alarms, we're not going to send those to people's homes. So we need to have some specific innovation for managing at home. We've got to make sure we get the infrastructure right to move information back and forth. And we've got to have triage systems for both identification, but also if we need to move people back from a home back to a hospital, we have to be able to do that smoothly. But that's one place. When you ask me, where is healthcare going? I think healthcare is going to the home and the community, not necessarily staying within the ivory walls of hospital systems. We're also going to have to do a better job of not just taking care of the patient, but of the caregiver. Because if you're at home, you've often got families who are involved. And we need to develop tools and solutions for them as well. I think we have not done a great job of always thinking about the nurse and the doctor in a hospital and making sure that their jobs are still delightful using our technologies. We've got to do an even better job if we're going to take this to the home where you've got less skilled people who are participating in healthcare. So we have a lot of needs to address to fulfill this kind of aspiration of taking care of the home, and some of them are listed here. It's got to be largely autonomous when it can be. It's got to provide unassailable cues that you're doing the right thing. We have to make sure that there's a great user experience, and that the systems we use are going to have to be broadly interoperable. These are big challenges. But I think challenges is why we're here, right? We innovate solutions. And it's not just going to the home, it's obviously going to the community. I mean, there are a bunch of fairly non-standard players who are now involved. When you think about Best Buy and Google and Apple and Amazon, I don't know, did anybody just get a notice? I did this week that Amazon is willing to provide primary care to you for $9 a month. Primary care by Amazon for $9 a month. If you're a member of Prime, you have to be a member of Prime. But imagine that. I mean, imagine how whatever decisions are going to be made by an Amazon-related physician getting to your doctor and your hospital. How are we going to connect that information? We have important challenges. And so there are plenty of gaps in the portfolios that we need to fix, right? Remote patient monitoring has to be much better. Closed-loop feedback controlled systems like we do in cars. Like if your car can autonomously drive you to the airport, how is it that the infusion therapy that you're getting has to be titrated minute to minute by a clinician? We got room to move. And obviously, having an open innovation system is going to be terribly important. We've got to talk to each other so that we can make densely interoperable systems that work together for patients' benefits. And so Doubtlessly, AI going to raise it back. AI is going to be a part of the solution, right? We're going to look at all of these data feeds, all of the things you're doing. So I know I could use help if I'm driving past a Dunkin' Donuts and I start to turn in and pick up one of this. Somebody ought to be telling me, no, Joe, you can't do that. Look at what your BMI is. Stop. Go for a run. Don't do that. So we need lots of cues to help. We're going to be integrating up lots of information going forward, and these systems are remarkably powerful. And so we'll need to use them, not just to provide the best bit of care, but the best bit of behavioral nudges so that we can keep people on the straight and narrow. And then the last bit is doing a better job with chronic disease outcomes. We are clearly going to have to do better because we have this aging demographic where this tsunami of silver-haired people are going to show up with a whole host of chronic diseases. Unless, of course, the GLP-1 drugs do what they promise and solve just about every problem in healthcare. I don't know if you guys are tracking that, but the implications are that while we currently have 42% of our population being obese, some imagine we're going to give all of those people GLP-1 drugs, and all of the obesity is going to go away, and all of the diabetes is going to go away, and all of the peripheral vascular disease is going to go away. I'm not that optimistic. I'm hopeful that they're going to have a positive impact, but I still think we're going to be left with an enormous sea of patients who have a series of really challenging problems, and we're going to have to solve them in lots of different ways. I do believe there's a great future in what's labeled here as technology-enabled, clinician-directed, iterative self-care. And if you think about that, that's where we are with diabetes today. So you're clearly engaged with your doc, you're clearly engaged with technology, and you're being able to make informed decisions about what you eat and what you do and how you work out. Imagine if we do that with inflammatory diseases, or we do that with malignancies. Right now, we oftentimes give people therapy up until the point where they're toxic from the therapy, and then we say we've done the best we can. Imagine a world where you give therapy up until the point where a measure of your disease is diminished, and then we can stop, and you never have those side effects from the medicines. That's where I think we're headed. We got to answer the secular drive for convenience. If we're going to manage a whole sea of people with chronic disease, it has to be almost ambient. It can't be something that we engage people to do a lot of work to, because we as a people don't do that. And then obviously we've got to decrease the burden of cost, and we'll do so by managing that. This is the last advertisement. We're doing a lot of work. We've got a lot of technologies. A lot of it is in acute care, but we're moving toward doing a better job of taking care of the rest of the people who currently aren't in hospitals. And so if you ask me where healthcare is going, that was my answer. Healthcare is going in a lot of places. It's going to go home. It's going to go to the community. And it's going to solve the problems that are in front of us, which are many. We have to make sure that we provide value for money. We have to make sure that we meet people where they are. And then we've got to show to everybody who buys our stuff that it's worth it. And until or unless we solve those problems, we won't be sending healthcare in the right place. And so this is when you try to integrate up this picture. The future of healthcare is complicated, but I would encourage you to be fully engaged in it, because it is going to be in the hospital, it's going to be in the home, it's going to be in the community, it's going to be with the smartest systems we have to make sure that we make the best decisions we can, and we've got to have an overall integrated, smart, and learning healthcare system so that your kids can benefit from all of the work that's gone before them. And the only way we're going to do that is to make sure the systems are smart and interoperable and interrogable, and that we have built the path to that future. And so that's BD's logo. I always wondered what it was, and then the other day I saw it. Oops, that was, I can maybe back up. Probably not. Yeah, there we go. It's what it is a brilliant engineer looking into the new day and the promises that we have in healthcare. So thank you very much for your time. I hope you found that interesting enough. And it's been a pleasure to return back to Utah.